Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And let me say thanks to the organizers of the People's Assembly for inviting me here this evening. I've lived in Barbados all my life, except for brief stints in the Eastern Caribbean and the UK when I was on attachment with Barclays Bank. Over the last couple of weeks, I was driving through Barbados. I'm going to talk mainly tonight about the stock market and show you the relationship with the loss of confidence in Barbados and the decline in activity on the market. But in driving through Barbados recently, I've never seen so many for sale, for rent signs. They've become a feature of the Barbadian landscape. And I remember when I was in London, one of the lecturers used to say to us, whenever you see in a city or a country so many for sale and for rent signs for a long time, there is a massive loss of confidence in the particular city, town, or country. Now, that has all to do with the real estate market, and I believe if you look in the papers and you see the amount of houses for rent, if you walk through the malls in Barbados and you see every other week somebody closing down for rent and so on, all those are indicators of a society or an economy that is grappling with problems of credit. And back in 2011, when the head of the Invest Barbados made the point about the loss of thousands of jobs, and with it, the kind of, $1 billion and so on. What was being done by the powers that be to arrest this slide in a sector that I consider to be extremely important and dear to my heart? Because when the majority of that legislation was enacted, I was a young investment banker, and we had to understand where the government at the time was taking Barbados, and hence our bank decided that we had to be trained, and that's why I ended up in England. There was legislation, to attract foreign sales corporations, international businesses, captive insurance, and that had to do with the insurance of boats, a registration of boats, sorry. And it seemed as though it was something that didn't apply to Barbados. But in a short space of time, there were many boats being registered in Barbados, which brought revenue into the country. But that's not really my area. My area is the stock market. And quite recently, I was in Jamaica attending a meeting, cricket meeting, and a sitting member of Parliament in Jamaica asked me what had gone wrong with Barbados. And it may seem strange. We are a very small island, but what I've realized in traveling the West Indies whilst I was working and as an administrator of cricket, the islands in the Caribbean look up to Barbados for leadership. Barbados is one of the few countries in the Caribbean that has never failed to redeem government paper, treasury notes, government debentures. We have always redeemed and redeemed on time. Not so in Jamaica. Not so in Jamaica. Or Trinidad, they had problems. So he wanted to know what had gone wrong. Now, I hadn't done any research on it, but I pointed him to two people and two statements. One, the governor of the central bank, who mentioned that the medium-term fiscal strategy had gone awry. And the statement made by the Minister of Finance last year that there was a loss of confidence in Barbados. An amazing statement. Now, over the past 6 years, there has been a marked decline on the local stock exchange. We have seen interest in Barbadian conglomerates, and this interest came from South Trinidad. And there were a number of takeovers. A decline in activity on the stock market is indicative of a loss of confidence. The Barbados Stock Exchange's year-end reports for 2008 to the third quarter of 2013. I didn't manage to get the fourth quarter, but I believe that would have continued in the process which I would outline to you all tonight of decline. 2008 was challenging. There was a decline of 52% in trading volume and 10% in the value traded when compared to 2007. In addition to the declines in trading, all three indices registered declines for 2008, all three. For example, in 2007, the trading volume was 162 million. In 2008, the volume fell to 78 million, a drop of 52%, as I mentioned previously. I should also mention that in 2007, CIBC Investments Cayman Limited completed the takeover of First Caribbean International Bank by purchasing approximately 130 million shares with a value of approximately 425 million shares from the shareholders who accepted their offer. Now, this one single transaction accounted for 83% of the total volume traded and 81% of the value traded in 2007. By comparison, in 2008, the takeover transactions of Barbados Farms Limited and BS&T, collectively accounted for 55 million, approximately, or 71% of the total value of shares traded. Now, massive decline. Stock market. And the stock market is a very good indicator because the pension fund managers of the large insurance companies, the banks, all of them go to the stock exchange to invest. And when you see that sort of change, you know that there are problems. But the minister had already said that there was a loss of confidence. Let's take a look at 2009. And this is where the market almost ground to a halt. The overall market value of shares traded declined by 87%, while the market value of the shares traded declined by 91%. Again, it should be noted that in 2008, takeover transactions played a significant role in trading activity. Now, a takeover is where one company, rather than be going on the market buying bit by bit, makes a proposal to another company, and based on the legislation, once they can get a certain percentage, then you're forced to sell the remainder of the shares. And usually they make an offer that is above market price to make it attractive. put it bluntly, and in figures that you could understand, in 2008, trades were 5,415. Trades are the transactions. In 2009, 1,839. Investment managers realize, and lenders, that the investors in Barbados were taking flight. They had lost confidence, and they had begun to move elsewhere, where probably they felt investments were safer. Now, there was also a central bank statement where, in its review for the economy for 2009, they described the growth in GDP as stagnant. It was also characterized by a significant contraction of 5.3%. And when an economy contracts like that, all investors stop, take note, and not hide, but hold their money. In the market, you buy, you sell, or you hold. So they were holding on to their money. And you may ask, what was the power doing? There was a lot of talk about public-private sector projects. And these projects have been discussed from 2008 onward. None. Investors watch these things. So, and I'm not making fun. I remember a picture of the late Prime Minister at Pickering, turning the sword for a housing development project. My friend and Conde Marion. Have you heard anything else about that? Let's move on to 2010. In 2010, there were marked improvements in trading activity when compared to 2009. But I want you to listen to me carefully. The overall market value increased by 32.2%, along with an associated increase in market value of 44%. However, it should be noted again that there was one block trade transaction which occurred in the last quarter of 2010, which played a significant role in the total trading activity. If overall market activity had been adjusted for this transaction, there would only have been a minor increase for 2010 of 4.8% in terms of value, but a decline in value of 23.7%. Now, let me explain something. It is possible to have an increase in percentage-wise in the actual trades, but the decline in value was indicative of share prices falling because of a lack of demand for equities, stocks, and bonds by mainly the institutional investors, the insurance companies, banks, and other corporate entities that invest on the stock market. There was also a 2.8% 1.8 decrease in the number of trades in 2010 as compared to 2009. Straight figures, there were 1,799 transactions on the stock market in 2010, compared to 1,839 in 2009. You remember earlier I mentioned in 2008, 5,000 trades. So you can see what was happening. In 2010, most of the international exchanges experienced growth in their index measure, with the exception of the Tokyo Nikkei 225 index. In this region, both the Jamaican and Trinidadian stock exchanges recorded increases in their main indices, while the Barbados Stock Exchange recorded, and the Eastern Caribbean Stock Exchange recorded declines. Barbados, however, recorded the greatest decline. In addition, the economic environment worsened due to the death of our Prime Minister, and that added to the weakening confidence in Barbados' economic prospects. Therefore, underlying economic conditions in Barbados were having a more negative impact on investor confidence, as evidenced by the performance of the stock market. 2011. You could say that 2011 was a good year. But again, due mainly to two extraordinary transactions which occurred during the first half of the year. There were also early predictions of economic growth in the local economy, and this may have stirred the activity for the first 6 to 9 months of the year. Yeah. The two extraordinary transactions to which I referred are Emira, Barbados Holdings Incorporated's takeover of Light and Power, and that was a major transaction, and AMCL Holdings Limited's takeover of Ansa Barbados Limited. These two transactions impacted heavily on the performance. Again, if overall market activity had been adjusted for these two transactions, there would have been a decline of 34% in terms of both volume and value. In summary, Barbados recorded a third consecutive year of weak stock market activity, reflecting the business communities, and that's apostrophe S, including the institutional investors and high-profile private individuals' concerns about economic growth prospects in Barbados. 2012. Trading for the year started slowly but picked up with increased activity during the last quarter of the year. Now, the two transactions that I mentioned just now, pursuant to takeovers, the Ansa Macal and Republic Bank takeovers. Again, if you exclude these extraordinary transactions, total volume would still have decreased by 10% and trading value by 6%. There was also a decrease in the number of trades of 6%. A fifth year of decline. And this is indicative of a loss of confidence. A market does not do like that. United States, in the United States, the stock market in 2008 crashed, basically. President Obama came up with all kinds of plans. And one of the plans that he had was to make sure that small businesses recovered. In Barbados, small businesses are reeling. I have a friend, went to school with me at St. Giles Boys School, and he has a rum shop. And on Sundays, he would normally do $300–400 because the guys would go around by him on Sunday mornings, not having to go to work, most of them. And he tells me that his average sales now on Sundays are around $60 to $70. He's planning to go back to Canada where he lived for a short period of time. Now, I mentioned that I didn't have the figures for the fourth quarter of 2013. But for the first 3 quarters, a decrease of 13%. So Barbados has had 6 years of a constant decline in trading activity on the stock market. Overall, stock market activity since 2009 is indicative of a weakening economy with adverse effects on investor confidence. In fact, were it not for one-off transactions, the stock market performance would have been considerably worse. And those one-off transactions are the takeovers that I spoke about. Now, added to all of this, I remember investors do their own numbers, they watch the economy, and they listen to the main speakers on economic matters in the country. So, added to these developments was the failure to come on stream of well-published and publicized private sector projects. And that resulted from financing difficulties that were exacerbated by growing pessimism about Barbados' economic condition. Further compounding the country's problems were the consistent downgrades of Barbadian debt by Standard & Poor's and Moody's. These rating agencies, ladies and gentlemen, if you do not listen to them, you do that at your peril, because they crunch the numbers, and the international banks usually rely on them for independent analysis and information on economies. So if you get 1 downgrade, 2 downgrades, 3 downgrades, and you scoff at that or at the downgrades, you do it at your peril. So when Barbados went to the international capital market to borrow the $500 million post downgrade, 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 downgrade for free, I didn't want to say, ask me, and I would have told them the possibility of getting $250 or $500 million on the international market after successive downgrades was like putting a pan of ice in the sun at midday and coming back at 6 o'clock and getting ice. With the investors' perception of country risk rising, government and private companies faced increased financial challenges, making it more difficult to revive economic growth. Now, going forward, Barbados has nobody seems to take advice in Barbados anymore. But I will, for whatever it's worth, make a few suggestions as to how we get back investor confidence in Barbados. Quite seriously, a substantial and sustained improvement in government finances, including debt reduction, is critical to maintaining economic stability and therefore reviving confidence in the economy. The debt has to be reduced. Secondly, there needs to be improvement in the business environment through a reduction in bureaucratic red tape and procedures. This is vital to facilitating private sector operations. You can't take 2 months. You know, the other day I called a government office and it was about 9:30 and the PBX rang and rang and rang for about 20 minutes. I had to put down the phone and I decided to drive into town. International investors, it doesn't work like that. Related to all of this, we need a resurgence of our offshore sector. This requires serious consideration and action. It requires urgency in implementing institutional and legislative changes if we are to remain competitive. Now, local companies need to show a greater willingness to engage in export activities. If we achieve my first two suggestions and local companies have an improved environment, the resumption of growth will require that they make significant investments, thus creating a momentum and rebuilding confidence of regional and offshore investors. Stronger economic growth would also require increased international investment, improved government finances, and declining debt will suggest greater stability and will raise the confidence of the international investor. However, I feel that local companies will need to be more proactive in seeking international and regional partnerships in developing their business activities. This will lead to a stronger and more diversified economy capable of sustained improvements in standards of living of our population. Finally, I want to say something. We can talk and make all these suggestions, but there are only three people that can drive all the ideas that are being put before them. It's okay to make a political decision at election time, like not one single government worker will go home. Now, no. That's politics. That is politics. But once you win the government, responsibility dictates that you now make the economic adjustment. I hate to see people going home, but if that economic adjustment is done and it can save the country, then you have to do that if you are a responsible government. Political speech, one thing. You might maneuver the opposition and so on, or the other party. But when the time comes, you have to make economic decisions. Recently, a couple of days ago, Sir Frederick Smith made a comment that you have to have the guts. You make the political decision, you may say, they're going to kill me, because I promised them that. But you have to have the guts. I had a note here 2 minutes ago that I had 1 minute. So anyhow, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for listening to me. Have a good evening and get home safely.